Hour. All right, so President Trump has 5 days to decide if the Democratic rebuttal to the GOP memo about the alleged FBI surveillance abuses should become public. The House Intelligence Committee voting unanimously to release that rebuttal. So what happens now? Joining us now is Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff. He's the ranking member of the House Intel Committee who drafted the rebuttal memo. Good morning, Congressman.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well. What if the president decides not to release your rebuttal?
I think that's going to be very hard for the White House. They've tried to make the case that they released the Nunes memo in the interest of transparency. So to say, well, we don't want the country to see this, I think is untenable. What I'm more concerned about, Alysin, is that they make political redactions. That is, not redactions to protect sources or methods, which we've asked the Department of Justice and FBI to do, but redactions to remove information they think is unfavorable to the president. That could be a real problem, and that's our main concern at this point.
Okay, and if that were true, then what would you do?
Well, you know, we have limited recourse there. We could try to force a vote in the House of Representatives, or we can seek a declassification review with the FBI and the Department of Justice, but that takes time. So there aren't a lot of options, but it will certainly appear that the White House is trying to stonewall again if, in fact, they make these political redactions that we fear.
There are a couple of headlines from the Nunes memo that I want to bounce off of you. And I know that this is a challenge because until the president says that you can release it, I know that your rebuttal is classified. But this is out there, and I want you to try to respond to it as best you can. So one of them is that the deputy director of the FBI, McCabe, testified before your committee in December of 2017 that no surveillance warrant, no FISA court, to the FISA court would have been sought without the Steele dossier information. Is that true?
That's a characterization. It's not what Director McCabe or Deputy Director McCabe actually said. Well, I can't go into the details of what he said. Essentially, his argument was we look at this as a complete whole. All the parts of the application are important. That was really the sum and substance of what he said. The broader point, though, was that the only parts of the dossier that were included were those that pertained to Carter Page, and some of that was corroborated. We set this out in our responsive memo. So it's very important for people to understand, contrary to the very misleading impression that the GOP gives, the salacious video and all that stuff, that was not part of the FISA application, only the parts pertinent to Carter Page. And there was corroboration of some of those very important elements.
That's really helpful. So you're saying that the FISA court never saw the most salacious, uncorroborated stuff?
That's exactly right. And we'll be releasing the transcript of our hearing last night. And you can see members making this argument. And unfortunately, it's because they haven't read the underlying materials. So one of my colleagues, for example, said, well, we don't have evidence that Michael Cohen made a trip to Prague. This is also part of the dossier. But that Michael Cohen trip to Prague wasn't part of the materials provided to the FISA court. So it's very disingenuous to say, well, the FISA court was misled because we don't believe Michael Cohen went to Prague when that information was never provided to the court.
So listen, you say that the Nunes memo mischaracterizes the underlying information and what really happened. They say it doesn't. Would it be possible for you to release the actual Andrew McCabe testimony in front of your committee that was behind closed doors so everybody can read it with their own eyes?
You know, I think that, frankly, all the testimony that we're receiving ought to be released at the conclusion of our investigation. We'll have to make strategic judgments about when to release certain parts of the transcripts. The downside is, of course, you tell other witnesses what others are saying, and that allows them potentially to align their version of events. So as a general practice, I don't favor selective release of information. But we have made exceptions. The majority made exceptions for Carter Page and Eric Prince. We made an exception both of us supported the release of Glenn Simpson's transcripts. But I think we do need to be concerned about selectively releasing testimony and the overall impact on the investigation.
Okay, here's another headline from the Nunes memo that I want to get you to comment on. I'm taking it directly from it. Here's an excerpt. Neither the initial application in October of 2016 nor any of the renewals disclose or reference the role of the DNC, Clinton campaign, or any party campaign in funding Steele's efforts, the dossier. Even though the political origins of the Steele dossier were then known to senior and FBI officials, why not tell the FISA court that this was paid for by the Clinton campaign and DNC?
Well, as we will set out in the response, the FBI did include information about a potential political bias. It did set out information about who had provided the support for Christopher Steele.
But is this true? Is the way they're characterizing it true, that the FISA court didn't know that it was Hillary Clinton's campaign in the DNC?
It's not true that the FISA court didn't know of a political bias. They don't mention specific names. Now, even when they refer to Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump in the FISA court application, they refer to them as Candidate 1 and Candidate 2. This is how the masking process works, and it's deeply ironic that the same people who've been complaining of improper unmasking are suggesting that names should have been unmasked in the FISA application.
But did it say Candidate 1, let's just say, paid for this?
I'm going to allow you to see exactly what they said when our release is declassified, so you can see precisely what was represented to the FISA court. I think the FISA court was made well aware of the potential political bias of those that were supporting Christopher Steele's work. And at that point, of course, there was only one other candidate in the race. But I don't want to characterize it. I'd rather have you see exactly what was said in the FISA application.
We'd sure like to see that. The president seems disinclined to do anything that you'd like him to do. He has gone after you personally. He tweeted about you. So are you worried that whatever conflict you're having with the president will get in the way of some of this?
You know, I think the conflict is less about the president and myself and more about the president's concern over his legal liability and what is coming to light in terms of relationships between his campaign and the Russians. So I think he views this entirely through that prism, not any personal animosity between the two of us. Frankly, I think his tweets are demeaning to the presidency, and that's about it. I am concerned, though, that in an effort to protect himself, he will order political redactions. And this is why we've asked the Department of Justice and FBI separately to report to our committee anything that they recommend be redacted to protect sources and methods, so we can separate any legitimate redactions from any politics that the White House may try to impose.
Look, this is neither here nor there, but why do you have to share a nickname with Bob Corker and Marco Rubio and Kim Jong-un?
You know, the last nickname he gave me was Sleazy Adam Schiff, now just Little Adam Schiff, which seems like an improvement. Does that mean that he's warming up to me? It's also very confusing.